Hi. All right, so welcome to another week. Don't forget to make a summary of this. We're gonna watch a video as well as look at some PowerPoints. Start off with the PowerPoint. Oops. Okay. Can you guys see it? Okay. This is talking about electricity market design and the detail of analysis. In business, we want to make sure that we have the details, and you have to be flexible because the way things are, you want to make sure you're in demand and that the funds are coming in and this is not going to be in the red for you. Electricity market products and the risk management. This is an example of the NEM. This is presented by Dr. Sean Hopper. He's a manager at Market Insights. The outline of his presentation is introduction of the AEMO, brief overview of spot market, generation business overview, retail business overview, and risk mitigation. About AEMO, AEMO is a member-based, not-for-profit organization. We're independent energy market and system operator and system planner for the National Electricity Market, NEM, and the WA Wholesale Electricity Market, OEM. We also operate retail and wholesale gas markets across the southeastern Australia and Victoria's gas pipeline grid. We have electricity, wholesale electricity market, the WEM, and we have National Electricity Market EM, today's session. Gas, declared wholesale gas market, the DWGM, and short-term trading market, SSTM, and gas supply hub. The AEMO services the independent subsidiary of the AMO, established in 2021 to enable the transparent provision of the advisory and energy services to national electricity market jurisdictions. EMO does not own its own operate equipment nor retail electricity. Network reset owners and operators per region. Transmission network service provider, distribution network service provider with the extranet, SA Power Networks, Trans Networks, PowerLink, Aragon Energy, Energix, Energy, QLD, TransGrid, and then we have market participants own and operate generation market. Mortlake Power Station, different power stations. We want to end use consumers by increasingly installing distributed energy resources as a rooftop solar. NEM dispatch and pricing model, about 40,000 km transmission lines. That's about 204 WH supplied each year. That comes out to about 11.5 billion traded for 2020 to 21. Remember that's during COVID, so about 10.7 million customers. Total generation is about 65.3 GW. Regional prices apply at each regional reference mode, RRN. Losses between regions calculated dramatically based on dispatched interconnector flow. All prices with the region related to the RRN by fixed annual marginal loss factor, MLF. Fighting dispatch and pricing in the wholesale electricity market. We have market generators, GGG, and market consumers. We have our end users. You can see right here, AEMO, scheduled loads. How's the price formed? You can see right here, the reserve is available, but not in use. So not all the bids are dispatched. Everyone's paid the market price. We have 50 at $10, 100 at $10, 20 at 30, 30 at 50, 10 at 60, 20 at 10, 20 at 40, 30 at 60, 70, and 10 at 80. NEM pricing settings, limits on allowable prices, market price cap, 15,500, and market price is 1,000. Note that NEM frequency markets have a price flow of 0. In rare cases, the AEMO can apply intervention pricing. The AEMO does the additional run on the NEM dispatch engine, so it can determine what prices have been without market intervention. When the EMO uses the reliability and emergency reserve trader, the RERT function, it often invokes intervention pricing. If the cumulative price threshold is about 1,390,000 and 100 is exceeded over a 70 period, the AEMO applies to the administrative price cap. Physical and financial flows of the market. We have generator, network service providers, end users, retailers, NEM, future market, generation business overview, generation function, generation of electricity delivered to the national pool of customers and retailers at a specific price. Revenue from selling electricity is spot market, fluctuates every 5 minutes. The role of generator trading system is to manage physical generation risk, a load exposure using the derivatives and generation, maximize profitability within the risk limits, and manage trade-off between reliability and risk. Generation risk defined. Why do you need to hedge generation risk? Well, it increases your net profit for a given contact and plant position whilst mitigating the risk of not achieving this. And we have risk trends and development changes. We have fuel, supply risk, plant risk, testing, maintenance, recall, start times, network outages, constraints, contracts, competitor behavior, government policy risk, carbon, environmental risk, temperature, wind, rain, and bushfire. CARPEX, OPEX risk, demand and supply for electricity, gas market, international markets, generation risk, unplanned outage, financial impacts, retail business overview, the retail function. A retail business sells electricity to customers at a fixed price. The price of purchasing electricity of a spot market fluctuates every 5 minutes. The role of retailers trading team is to manage fixed price exposure using derivatives, generation, price customers according to their risk profile, maximize profitability within the risk limits, manage trade-off between competitors and risk. The NEM supplies about 200,000 megawatt hours per electricity per year. An average household will have around 6 MWH per year and approximately 9 million customers. Retail risk defined. Why do you need to hedge retail risk? To manage your cost of supplying electricity to customers. Questions retailers ask: how many customers do I have? What type of customer are they? How the load is using and when? Would extremely violate day and extended period? Poor cash flow outcomes of the wholesale side catastrophically affect cash flow. Retailers generally can't turn a customer demand on and off. If customer consumption changes, many risk. Forecasting consumer load and unknown customer usage, manage through hotspot price, derivatives, weather hedges, customer accrualment. Exceptions to this exist, such as contracts and large C&I customers, smelter, which provide retailer the options to ask customer to reduce the usage by a certain amount, a specific time, retail risk, and load risk. We have customer types, risk and mitigation, trading terminology. We have contract, swap, cap, OTC, over the counter, extended trade, future contract hedging, short, square, and long. Trading terminology, swap contract, buyer pays seller, differences between strike price and shop price, seller pays a difference. Trading terminology, we have the cap, generator pays a difference between the strike price and the spot price to the exchange for the fixed premium. Trading terminology, why hedge, high spot prices strongly are correlated with the high demand, hot summers, days, cold winter evenings, potential for retailer to incur the massive pool costs at the times of a hot spot price volatility. And example is 7 hours of high prices. Trading terminology, we have unhedged, scenarios unhedged. Retailer did not hedge any of its customer load. The average spot price for the day was about 700 MWH. Average revenue for customers is around 100 MWH. Trading terminology in short, retailers thought to be hedged to the customer load, but it's really about 100 MW short at the peak, equivalent to demand of about 40,000 residential customers. Cost of swap is about 70 MPH. Result pool cost about 950 higher than it would have had the retailer hedged fully. And swaps and caps normally come in the block, so you need to determine how much is appropriate. Trading terminology square. Squares retailer perfectly hedges to the customer load and does not incur any unbudgeted pull costs. Wholesale purchase cost could then simply be a sum of the swap and cap cost. Trading terminology is long. Long retailer is overhedged during the high prices and receive payments of the contracts and more of an offset if the pool of cost. Example, if retailer is about 100 MPH long over the peak, the average price is about 1,200. They receive about 1.8 million over about 15 hours. A general is unlikely outcome for a pure retailer as they won't own generation assets to run, and this operational advantage of the gentailer. Electricity differential, forward versus futures, OTC versus exchange traded. You have OTC, commission of terms is high, versus exchange traded is none. Liquidity of OTC would be less liquid versus exchange traded more liquid. Counterparty of OTC is a riskier credit, etc., and exchange traded would be minimal risk. The exchange acts as a clearinghouse, settlement, delivery, financially closed out. Then you have the margin of OTC is not margin system, and exchange traded would be margin required. The market to mark to market, OTC is not marked to market, and exchange traded is marked as market at least a daily basis. ASX, futures price validity. Futures exchange traded swaps and caps are liquid, can be very vital, and set basis for retail prices. Electricity derivatives, exotics, and insurance. There are many financial derivative products that participants and non-participants will use to either speculate the validity outcomes or use these products to manage the risk. Option contracts, Asian option, average price options, swapation, and weather derivatives, and plant insurance. Questions of where to find out more. We have Energy Explained, fact sheets, Energy 101 series, complex topics in simple language, major publications, integrated system plan, quarterly energy dynamics, renewable integration study, initiatives, current major programs and trials initiatives, as well as strategic partnership and key industry submissions. You want to subscribe, it would be like newsletters, initiative updates, and market and system notices. Here's an example. You can visit the NEM Overview e-learning course, and it runs on a number of training courses for electricity and gas. There you go. That's an example. Training online. All right, here we go. This is electricity markets. Oops, sorry, I went right by.
Electricity is a relatively new type of tradable commodity. Several characteristics differentiate it from other commodities such as crude oil or natural gas. First, it is completely fungible, meaning 1 megawatt-hour of electricity produced from either coal or natural gas contains exactly the same amount of energy. Second, it must be produced and used simultaneously. Industrial battery storage is still prohibitively expensive. Therefore, additional systems need to be in place to meet peak levels of consumption. Third, the supply must meet demand exactly in the power grid. Ancillary services and demand response programs ensure that increases in demand are handled in real time. This means uneconomic generation resources are not dispatched when demand is low. They are only put into service during periods of peak demand. Due to these unique characteristics of electricity, independent system operators, ISO, and regional transmission organizations, RTO, are responsible for keeping the power grid balanced between generation and load. ISOs and RTOs forecast and schedule generation to assure that sufficient generation and backup power is in place to meet unexpected demand or generation loss. ISOs and RTOs must be non-commercial organizations, neutral and independent from commercial players. Currently, there are 9 ISO and RTOs in North America. Each one is responsible for the reliability, operations, resource planning, and expansion in the deregulated electricity market. Each ISO and RTO typically operates and manages 4 markets: energy, capacity, financial transmission rights, and ancillary services. Let's first look at how ISOs and RTOs manage the energy market, which includes the generation and consumption of electricity. They manage the energy market via two sub-markets. The first is through a day-ahead market, and the second is through the real-time market. In the day-ahead market, electricity generators and load-serving entities submit their bids to ISO RTOs to receive and offer electricity to the power grid based on varying costs for each hour or next operating day. In the real-time market, ISOs and RTOs manage the changes in production and consumption throughout the day. This can range from 5 minutes to half-an-hour increments. ISOs and RTOs optimize the generation dispatch schedule, where they consider cost, security, and transmission constraints. Market participants will commit to the schedule with a locational marginal price, or LMP, set at each location, based on published prices from ISO RTO. In the real-time market, operators send dispatch instructions to each generator based on actual system operating conditions in a real-time basis. Generation and load are priced at each node on the bus. For longer-term grid resource stability, ISOs and RTOs operate a capacity market that auctions the commitment of providing electricity generation capacity to ensure generation exceeds load in the long term. This market incentivizes long-term capital investment in generation resources, and revenues are paid to the capacity providers regardless of whether energy is produced or not. CME Group offers a variety of futures and options contracts for electricity day-ahead, real-time, and capacity markets. This provides market participants a variety of regional locations to hedge and manage risk exposure.
Hold on. And now, this is about monopolies. You might think about maybe Spectrum being a monopoly.
Welcome to Crash.
Or T-Mobile, or maybe you're thinking about Disney for movies. It just depends. Or airlines. Sometimes they buy each other out. Sometimes they crush each other. It just depends. But this is about monopolies and anti-competitive markets.
Crash Course Economics. My name is Jacob Clifford.
And I'm Adrienne Hill. Today we're going to talk about monopolies, which are terrible, illegal, and only serve to exploit helpless consumers, except when they're delivering essential services that competitive free markets kind of fail to deliver.
So are monopolies good or bad or
both?
When some people hear the word capitalist, they picture the robber barons of the 19th century, cutthroat monopolists like Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and John D. Rockefeller. They dominated industries like oil, railroads, banking, and steel, and would do anything to crush their competitors. After all, in Rockefeller's words, the growth of a large business is merely a survival of the fittest. Now, it's true, market economists love competition, but monopolies are the antithesis of competition. In most cases, economists want to prevent monopolies, not celebrate them. Let's go to the thought bubble.
A pure monopoly is a market controlled by one seller with a good or service that has no close substitutes. But the true power of a monopoly comes from its ability to keep competitors out of the market. Monopolies are able to erect obstacles that economists call barriers to entry. If a company starts offering a brand new product in a market with low barriers, they won't maintain market power for very long. Take gourmet food trucks. In the last decade, gourmet cooks started moving into the street food business, competing in a market historically associated with lower quality options like hot dog vendors. These food trucks were a hit. Demand was high and the barriers to entry were relatively low, so more and more competitors jumped in. Now, food trucks are kind of everywhere. And that's exactly how capitalism is supposed to work. People wanted more street food options, and profit-seeking entrepreneurs gave them what they wanted. Incentives and competition made society better off. But imagine a city where there are limited numbers of licenses for food trucks. And I own all of them from my fleet of artisanal macaroni and cheese trucks. I also know the mayor, since he's a big fan of artisanal macaroni and cheese. If I can convince the mayor to ban traditional pushcart food vendors with their shawarma and their bacon-wrapped hot dogs, I'll have a monopoly on street food. I'm not increasing my profit by producing more stuff. I've influenced government regulations in such a way that anyone who's hungry but doesn't want to enter a building has to buy food from me. This is sometimes called crony capitalism, and it's a big reason many economists call for government transparency and accountability.
Thanks, Thought Bubble. Companies don't have to have a literal monopoly to exercise monopoly power. When a single company has a huge market share in its industry, like Google does for search, they wield a lot of the same power that a pure monopoly would. Now, when a few firms control a large majority of market share, it's called an oligopoly. The market for mobile device operating systems is a good example, with Google's Android and Apple's iOS. The point is that one company doesn't need to have 100% of market shares to operate like a monopoly. In the example of the anti-food truck ordinance, the barrier to entry was government regulation. But what are some other ways companies maintain large market shares? Well, there's also control of resources. Like De Beers once had 90% market share in diamonds because they controlled the world's diamond mines. Another barrier is high startup costs. You might want to build a nuclear power plant to compete with your local power company, but you need a whole lot of money to get in the game.
Monopolies can restrict output and charge higher prices without worrying about competitors. This is why most economists support antitrust laws that promote competition and outlaw anti-competitive tactics. They're called antitrust laws because monopolies used to be called trusts. In 1890, the U.S. passed the Sherman Act, named for Senator John Sherman. Sherman argued, if we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of any of the necessaries of life. The Sherman Act outlaws any monopolization or attempted monopolization. Court rulings and later laws gave the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission greater authority to prevent monopolies. If the Coca-Cola Company wanted to purchase PepsiCo, it'd be a tough regulatory sell. In the U.S., mergers and acquisitions need to be approved by the government agencies. Economists call the act of buying companies that produce similar products horizontal integration. Like AT&T tried to buy T-Mobile, but failed because regulators believed the new company would control too big a share of the wireless communications market. Vertical integration, on the other hand, is when a company directly owns or controls its supply chain. For example, in the 1920s, the Ford Motor Company owned much of the entire supply chain needed to make cars. It owned iron and coal mines, and it made its own steel, glass, tires, and even paper in the massive River Rouge factory complex in Michigan. Vertical integration's complicated, and it's not always illegal. When a company just expands its business to insource part of its supply chain, that's usually not subject to antitrust regulation. Companies can run into some trouble when they try to vertically integrate via mergers. Antitrust regulations can also prevent companies from making anti-competitive deals with their suppliers. In the late 1990s, Microsoft was accused of pressuring PC manufacturers to pre-install Microsoft's web browser, Internet Explorer, and exclude their main browser competitor, Netscape. Regulators busted them and almost busted up the company. Even Toys R Us, it's gotten in trouble for conspiring with toy suppliers like Hasbro and Mattel to stop the manufacturers from selling certain toys to other stores. So monopolies and monopolistic behavior are bad, right? Well, it turns out sometimes they're useful. Look at patents. A patent grants an inventor exclusive rights to profit from a specific product or process. In the US, it's actually written into the Constitution. Patents and other intellectual property rights encourage innovation. Pharmaceutical companies spend billions of dollars each year developing drugs, and patents allow them to recover those research and development costs and ideally earn profit. A patent essentially guarantees their right to be a monopoly, but not forever. After a certain amount of time, usually about 20 years, a patent expires, which lowers the barriers to entry. Competition moves in, prices fall, and companies look for something new to patent. Intellectual property law and patents are really complex, and Stan, he's actually done a whole series about them.
Natural monopolies are a special situation where it's more cost-effective to have one large producer rather than several small competing firms. The best examples are public utilities in markets like electricity, water, natural gas, and sewage. They may be privately owned or publicly owned, but either way, they remain a monopoly because the government limits competition. I mean, if there were 3 competing electric companies in one city, that would mean building 3 different power plants and running 3 sets of power lines to the streets. The result would be higher costs. So in this case, it's cheaper to have one electric company because they have economies of scale. The monopoly can still raise prices and abuse its power, so the government often regulates prices and fees. Now, of course, there are debates about when the government should intervene and which markets justify natural monopolies. Nike has about 90% market share in basketball shoes, but it's not a natural monopoly. It's a non-coercive monopoly. There are plenty of other shoe companies and people aren't forced to buy Nike shoes. So there's no reason for the government to get involved. But that's not always the case. Up to the 1970s, AT&T was given natural monopoly status, which gave it nearly complete control in the telephone industry. In 1974, an antitrust lawsuit was filed by the Department of Justice, and the end result was the largest corporate breakup in American history. AT&T dissolved into 7 regional telephone companies, and other companies like Sprint and MCI quickly jumped into the market. This process is called deregulation, and it's happened in all sorts of markets, from delivering the mail to airlines.
So let's step back here. Why are we so worried about monopolies? Well, a lot of this has to do with pricing. For one, monopolies can charge more for their products than they could if the market was competitive. They can also engage in a practice called price discrimination. Price discrimination is the practice of charging different consumers different prices for exactly the same product. In fact, the earliest regulation of railroads came about because they were engaged in price discrimination. They charged different rates to haul freight. This gave an advantage to companies that ship more freight and helped to force smaller producers out of business, creating even more monopoly power in the economy. But price discrimination isn't just for monopolies, and it's not always illegal. To pull off price discrimination, a business needs to be able to segregate the market based on consumers' willingness to pay. The airline industry does this using time, charging those that book early less than those that book late. A price-sensitive student might only be able to pay $200, so she books a seat weeks or months in advance. A time-sensitive businesswoman that needs to be at a board meeting tomorrow might be willing to pay $800 for the same type of seat on the same flight. The point is, charging a single price wouldn't generate as much profit as charging different prices. Price discrimination happens more often than you might think. Discounts based on age or occupation are good examples. Price discrimination works best when firms have a large share of market power. If there were hundreds of airlines, it's unlikely that any one of them could price discriminate without losing customers. Like a lot of things we look at here in Crash Course, monopolies and pricing are complicated. Generally, competition is a good thing, except when it isn't. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Crash Course.
All right, so that concludes today. Don't forget to write your comments and see you next time. Bye.